Why do you think that so many professional artists are resistant to even exploring using some of these tools?
Well, as I said, I've been in the industry since 1996. Illustrators, whether they be digital or traditional, are struggling with, well, how do I work this into my workflow? How do I incorporate this and not rip off other artists? So I think we're misunderstanding what generative AI is doing with that art. Having an art background, understanding composition, color, value, character design. You have to know those things to be able to apply this art.
Most artists are pretty skeptical about generative AI, and honestly, we get it. Like most things, the internet has simplified and polarized these tools. You're either pro-AI or anti-AI. Any attempt to share your perspective, well, it's often met with a raging comment thread that gets nowhere. But we don't think this binary serves anyone. That's why we created a space for meaningful conversations, to explore, challenge, and better understand these tools. Today, we're excited to welcome David Kozlowski, a professional artist willing to dive into the topic head on.
Hey, everybody, excited to have a chat today. We like to focus on some of the conversations that are emerging around generative AI. Generally speaking, most artists have some amount of skepticism around using generative AI, what generative AI is going to do in the industry. That's where we decided we wanted to create a space to have meaningful conversations, bring people in that have a valuable perspective, have been in the industries that are impacted by these tools. We're very excited to welcome David, but hopefully you can introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about your background and kind of your perspectives on the space.
Absolutely. Thanks, really, Kent, for having me join this meeting, because I've been in the industry now for 25 plus years, and I've seen the transition from very traditional art into digital and Photoshop, and now onto AI. And I've been in a lot of these conversations over the last few years with people at all kinds of companies, big, small, big developers, indies. And, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of misgiving, as you just said. And I think the biggest issue right now is with the industry being in such flux, developers are having to find new ways to work, new ways to be productive, new ways to be successful. I think is a really big thing, and I think it needs to be understood better by the community at large. So I'm excited about using it. I've been using it now for the last 3 years. I've been all over the place using, I can't tell you how many of these generative AI apps. My personal experience, as I said, I've been in the industry since 1996. So I'm an Army veteran. I came out of the military after 5 years out of high school. And a lot of that military experience benefited me when I got in the game industry. So I worked on a lot of military simulations, from Jane's Combat Sims and Electronic Arts, America's Army, which was actually by the U.S. government. I've also built a number of apps for mobile, for PC games. So I started on Ultima Online, and I worked on Wing Commander Prophecy, the last Wing Commander game. I was on Kung Fu Panda World, a kids MMO. I built a game called Contract Killer 2, which was a mobile game. So I've touched just about every genre, every platform over the years. And now I'm at a small independent development company called Noctua Interactive. We're a bunch of industry gaming veterans, including Rick Neal, who was one of the producers on Madden football. In fact, he rescued it in 1996 after they had their skip year. So we, I think, collectively have like 80 years of game development experience. And we're all coming into this field with kind of a mission of, let's leverage this technology in a positive way. Let's use it to create jobs, and let's use generative AI to do something unique and different. So that's my short story told long.
It's really cool to hear some of the projects that you've worked on, because as a child of the 90s, I grew up on the internet and my computer, and I feel like, a lot of those names resonate with my childhood. So it's really cool to hear the legacy that you've kind of built, and you've got a group of people who've seen it all, that you've seen the technology transitions, the internet, mobile, now AI. We're kind of in that new transition period, trying to figure out how to use all this stuff. So one thing that I want to dig in on a little bit, what are your concerns and skepticisms about generative AI? What is it that you would say are the main issues that you have with how some folks are approaching generative AI, and kind of what you've seen as you've evaluated the landscape?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this is speaking about the Midjourneys and Leonardos and Krias of the world, apart from Invoke. So in those cases, those are more consumer focused apps. I don't want to say they're nerfed, but they're definitely governed. such that it's difficult to get the output you're looking for. So I think my biggest concern and criticism of generative AI art, particularly in the video game field, is that it's hard to get style consistency, character consistency across multiple images, right? You can do a lot of photo bashing and compositing, but you end up spending more time in Photoshop, I think, than you do in the generative AI tools. Fundamentally for us and the people that I know across the industry, most people have used it for pre-visualization, concept art, character design, provocative art to kind of stimulate the team's ideas. But where we're coming from is we want to move more into production with it. We need to be able to, let's say, create a scene and then break that scene down into its component assets, whether that's for 2D or 3D. But where it is lagging, and I don't know when this changes, is with 3D, is the ability to generate from text or image a 3D asset that you can actually put into a game. And the 3D artists I've talked to all say, well, look, I might as well just start over again. I can't mess with, the verts. I can't really do what I want to do with it. So I can make a statue, but I can't make a character. So I think those are the two big issues, consistency and 3D, at least at this juncture.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that goes back to some of the concerns that people have with the tool is that it's going to replace a lot of the creative process, and it's going to take out all of these component parts and steps to making the game, right? But when you actually get into using the tools and look at it from a production perspective, like actually using it, you start to realize the work's going to change, but there's still going to be work to get this all to actually be useful, right? To make a coherent game, to get that consistency, to get some of what's coming out of these systems to work. And I think the other piece is 2D to 3D as a good example. In a world where, let's say, it can generate a decent 3D model, you're still going to have to iterate on it, right? You can't just take that thing and throw it in the game because, let's say, for example, the backpack, you throw a reference image in and it creates a character and it, makes a backpack, but the backpack's kind of off. Well, how are you going to fix that? And what dimension are you fixing that? Are you fixing that on the concept art side, like that you fed into the 3D model? Does it create a good enough 3D model that you can throw it into a tool and refine it? You need that in order to get a usable asset. So there's definitely a lot of gaps in the tools today. And I think that's where having kind of this realistic take on what it can and can't do today, where it's going, is, I think it'll be beneficial. And I hope that's kind of where we spend most of our time today, is really having a practical conversation about what does the tool do? Like what do these tools broadly do? And with Invoke specifically, what are the boundaries that we're still fighting? Like where are we still kind of struggling to get what we need? Primarily to have the conversation of what is the role of the artist in this new world? I think that's like an interesting place to spend time. Why do you think that so many professional artists are resistant to even exploring using some of these tools?
I have a really strong opinion on this. So I'm really glad you asked. So I came out of art school in the early 2000s, and Photoshop was just kind of making its foray into the video game world. So I was a traditional 2D illustrator, went to Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and they were struggling to teach digital, right? I had one teacher that said, hey, just take a picture of this 3D, cardboard construction and pull it into Photoshop. I'm like, but I don't know how to use Photoshop. And the teacher actually told us, we'll go buy a book. Not really the feedback I was looking for. And the bigger problem really is, I think, Photoshop did not destroy illustration. It enhanced, it created new jobs. Sure, it displaced some traditional 2D illustrators that couldn't make the jump. I'll be honest, I struggled for years how to use a Wacom Pack. Just could not make that transition because I just didn't learn it. It wasn't native to me. I was a pen and paper guy, right? But it's interesting. So now, 20 years later, you see AI come in and the same arguments are coming up. Illustrators, whether they be digital or traditional, are struggling with, well, how do I work this into my workflow? How do I incorporate this and not rip off other artists? But here's the thing. When you go to art school, what's the first thing you do? You study art history. And you're looking at the masters. They're all dead. But then you start looking at the more contemporary artists, right? So if you want to be a comic book guy, I absolutely guarantee you 100% of the comic book artists out there today looked at Frank Frazetta and looked at Mike Mignola and looked at Jim Lee, and they copied their work. And that influenced their work. They stood on the shoulders of these other artists. So I think we're misunderstanding what generative AI is doing with that art. Having an art background, understanding composition, color, value, character design. You have to know those things to be able to apply this art. And I'll give you a really good use case. Last year, about September, my team at Noctua Interactive decided we want to go to the Game Developer Conference in March. So it gave us a bit of a runway, and we wanted to build a demo using generative AI assets. So we created a scene in Unreal. We created all of our 2D assets in Midjourney. We refined them in Photoshop. We got a build put together that was a run and jump Metroidvania side-scrolling action game with 2D assets mapped onto 3D characters, and it worked. We got it on the Steam Deck. We got to GDC, but I will tell you, it was the most painful experience of my life because it was all write a prompt, roll, re-roll, re-roll, a little bit in painting, go to Photoshop, Photo Bash, back into Leonardo, refine it. So we would make for one piece of art, 4 to 5 jumps between apps, and moreover, we would end up creating dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of pieces of art that never quite hit the mark. We could never nail a style.
Regardless of whether you use Invoke or, Midjourney or any of these other like tools, I think something that you kind of called out is probably one of the biggest criticisms that people have, which is the role of chance and randomization in the process of using these tools. And we're partnering with the Rhode Island School of Design. I was actually talking with the head of one of their generative courses where Invoke is being taught to students. And I was hearing him talk about the curriculum that they go through in this course, because they're talking about really this notion of generative creation where you're kind of like feeding a system and kind of having it help you along the way. And if you go back, there are a number of, I would say, artists, but also in some sense, like art philosophers almost, who kind of explore this idea of like, what is randomization, what is chance, and how does it influence an art, either the art or the artist as you're going through that iteration. We're now getting more control, and we're now making things a little bit less of a slot machine. You're not just rolling the dice and kind of letting it explore. You're really constraining it and helping guide that. So I'm curious, what are the biggest dimensions of control that you're primarily looking for as an artist and a creative when you're excited about these tools, when you think about these as useful things? You brought up consistency, but I'm just curious if there are other things that stand out as elements that you're really hopeful for.
Yeah, and you're right to say that there's a balance that needs to be struck. So I think what's really, really crucial is being able to get a character posed the way you want. So the silhouette read of that character, the object interaction, right? Can he hold something? Can it look like he's throwing something? And I think one of the things that's really lacking across any generative AI is character interaction, right? Can I get the eye contact between me and another character? Can I get, a relationship between objects? Can I throw him a football? When you talk about the randomization, that's really hard to achieve, right? You may re-roll something 10,000 times and never get it. You may get it on your third try. Don't know. Any of the future tools, my hope is for the kind of growth of this industry is that there's more ability to pose a character in a scene. But I think the control is crucial because at the end of the day, once you've identified a style and a character and a world, well, now you need to start outputting it. And that output needs to be efficient. And efficiency is the issue here because we discovered in that use case I mentioned that we spend an inordinate amount of time remaking the same stuff to hit on what we were looking for. And even when we photo bash and try to get it exactly right, you still had to paint over it. So our philosophy is a human hand touches everything, no matter what. Like nothing will come out of Invoke or Midjourney go right into the game. Never. Because we need that artist eye. We need that artist thought and the collaboration across the team. So the control, I think it's crucial, but it's only one part of it.
And I think that maps to kind of broader conversations we've had with folks in the industry and just broadly, even in different industries, which is the role of the human creative is not gone. In some ways, it almost is more critical in this age because it's easy for people to generate bad images now. So like the internet is littered with very mediocre outputs. And I think it really stands out when an artist is doing something, right? It stands out because an artist's hand is touched, whether it's AI or not. The artistry itself is in the overall composition and the output in kind of like the way it tells a story. I think that's something that you kind of called out that we've talked about in our community a lot is the need for the human to inject the story, because a lot of times that story is not told well by AI outputs today. Like very often it's kind of like you can get like dead eyes or things are not looking at each other. It doesn't kind of cohere in a meaningful sense. It doesn't tell the story. It tells kind of like randomness, right? And I think that there's a lot to be said around human control and really kind of coming in with the concept and guiding it to that concept, to that overall output. I think what would be interesting is maybe to just jump in and kind of talk about like the current state of the tooling. This won't be like teaching people how to use our tool. I really would like to just keep this more of like, this is what's possible with these tools in general. If you take off the guardrails, like you said, which is like the consumer grade tools that kind of put a really clean wrapping around all of it, but take away that control from you to really like pull what you want to out of this stuff. What can you do with it? How can you control it? What are ways that you can do that today? And where do we see that going in the future? I think that's kind of an interesting conversation. So I've got a couple of pieces of art that you've shared, your sketches and kind of I think one colored piece. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about each of these, just the work in general. And then maybe we'll kind of throw it into Invoke and kind of see what comes out. Let's walk through each of them. Tell us a little bit about each, and then we can kind of start playing around.
What you see here is an example of a quick sketch, probably like a 1-minute scribble that I did in graphite. And then I just kind of added some Prismacolor in there. So here, this is just a kind of a character idea to kind of push weight and gravity. Like this feels like a heavy character, which is kind of what I was going for. Wearing a heavy backpack and a heavy machine gun on his arm. And it's just kind of an exploration of an idea. But this is typical of the type of sketches I do in my sketchbook. I probably do a dozen of these a day. Just this is a really good example of quick ideation just out of my head. Yeah, so this is a similar take in that if you can see a lot of grayscale in there. So I just started this with marker. So what I'll do is often I'll just take a grayscale marker with a cool or warm gray, and I'll just scribble all over the page because I don't know what I'm creating, and I'll draw some circles and squares. And then I go in with, in some cases, a mechanical pencil. I think here I just took straight graphite, and I try and create something out of it. Like I don't so much trace the marker, but I try and take the feel of what's coming out of it. In other words, I let the marker tell me the story. And that way I can put a character on it that I wouldn't have come up with otherwise. It almost looks like a Roman soldier in space. But as you can see, the rifle is actually got the wrong perspective on one end versus the other. But that's okay because it's just for fun. And again, it got me fluid. That's the sort of fluidity of drawing that I like because I can output this stuff fast. And then I can take these into a tool and do more with it. So this is one I really like. I'm glad you picked that one. Same thing here, just scribbles, right? Just lines and circles and squares, basic shapes. I often go in with like a micron pen, as you can see in two of the images there, and just reinforce some of the lines.
Very, very cool. Okay, and this last one, this kind of scene.
Yeah, so this is at my video game company. We are working on a Metroidvania game. It's like I described, a run and jump scrolling platformer. It's built with 2D assets, but with 3D elements. So this was an attempt using Midjourney, Invoke, and also Photoshop by one of our team artists to try and create a environment. But one of the things I think you'll notice here is that the lighting is inconsistent, but it was a really good early attempt. So this was something just the other day we worked on, trying to bring this into Invoke and tear it apart and create something new out of it. And kind of our goal here, and this is our longer term goal, is to be able to take a tool like Invoke and create production art out of a scene like this. So this was a real world use case for us right here.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to have some fun. The fun thing about AI, I guess, is that you can work quickly and kind of get some initial ideas. Does any of these grab your attention more than the others that you want to kind of play with? Do you want to play with some ships, or do you want to play with one of these space
kind of like
warriors?
This guy. This guy here was interesting to me because there's a story here. Is he sitting on a wall looking across, on the rampart, looking across the field for the alien invaders, right? Is it the Zergs coming at him? I kind of like it because he's looking off into space, and it suggests, that there's something else happening in the scene.
Okay, so let's throw this onto the canvas. I'm going to create a new canvas here. I'm going to use this as a control layer. And I think for anyone who's watching this that isn't familiar with Invoke, we'll just kind of briefly talk about what we're doing at a high level. One of the things that you've mentioned is kind of controllability. We're taking one of these pieces here and using this as basically an image to guide and control the generation. So we're just going to kind of take this loose sketch and bring that in, and then we'll kind of play around with it. I think maybe the interesting thing to do here would be just to see what like comes out of this if we play with it. So do you have a prompt? Do you have like an idea of how you'd describe this?
That is a good one. Yeah, because he's got this old school kind of wooden based rifle but he's also very high tech. So it's kind of Warhammerish, right? I feel like this is a Warhammer, adjacent type of character.
Sure.
So, not dark fascism, but maybe like Roman era, Roman-esque soldier on a rampart.
Roman era sci-fi.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that definitely feels like that's where we're going right now in general. Roman era sci-fi bomber jacket. What type of jacket would you describe this as?
I kind of like the bomber jacket, right? Because it does break apart from the Warhammer thing, right? So it's a little bit more organic as opposed to hard metal and armor. So I like that this guy is kind of like in his kind of jungle fatigues on whatever alien planet he is on.
And your kind of idea or conception of this, is this kind of like armor, or is this like a more of like fabric scarf type material? Like what is this piece in your mind?
Could be. Yeah, you could put a little Mandalorian behind it. Like maybe the helmet itself is the high tech thing and it's got, a digital readout in front of it, but then he's got the, the scarf because it's cold and it's a snow planet. And he's got the shittiest job in the world of working the checkpoint. But yeah, you can see this guy he's having a miserable time.
Okay. We're going to use a concept art style for this just as we're like playing around with rendering and generating it. Say like futuristic armor, helmet, scarf, cold, wintry background.
Yeah.
We'll see what we get here. I anticipate we're going to have to play around with it. This is one of the fun things around control is like we're going to have to like help the AI see what we've got here. But it's always good to start and see what it comes up with on its own. So we're going to send this to our canvas. Not too bad.
Oh, that is already interesting. Oh, hey. I like
cool.
what he did with the rifle. I like how loose it feels still. Like it still feels like it has a lot of that hand-drawn aspect to it. Interesting.
Very cool concept. I like what it did with this kind of like visor. It gave it, to your point, it kind of gave it a little bit of that like futuristic look. If we take a look at this, we can actually compare this with the sketch. So we'll kind of like hide it. We can see where that really drove this. It interpreted this helmet, I would say, relatively faithfully in that it's kind of got that shape, but it filled in some of the details. It kind of fleshed that out. I would even say it did a really good job on the general jacket. Now, obviously, he should be like sitting on like a wall or something rather than kind of like skipping through the snow. But that's where we can kind of come in and maybe augment this, put him sitting on a wall or something like that. So yeah, this is already pretty cool. I think what I'm going to do is we will go in and kind of cut this guy out maybe, and then have him sit on a wall. What are some things that like stand out as areas that you'd want to change or that we'd want to kind of like guide this towards? Because I think that's going to be the opportunity for us as we're like playing around with this.
Yeah, I think the bottom of the rifle and the way his hand is engaging with it and on his knee, right? There's a weird interaction going on there that doesn't feel natural. And I think that's evident in the sketch I had. So this is where I'm hoping Invoke can help me solve that problem. Like down where his hand is holding the butt of the rifle and his leg, I think that's the area that needs some help.
That makes sense. We are going to draw a wall here. So I cut this guy out so that we could kind of save him as a layer. And now we're kind of coming in and doing this like this wall underneath that he's going to maybe be sitting on, a stone wall. And maybe we'll just go ahead and kind of change that area a little bit. But we'll go in and kind of regenerate this with him sitting on this wall. We've kind of got this, reimagined. Now he's like, it's a little bit more coherent. He's actually sitting on something. Mm-hmm. And now we get to kind of play around with this hand. So if we hide our control sketch, take a look at this, generally agree. I think there's like, this maps to the sketch well, but the question is like, what are we hoping for? So how would you want to change that? Would we be operating here on the image without any control? Is that kind of the idea?
Potentially. I think what's interesting is the way you've approached this is the way I have been approaching my work in Invoke. So that's reinforced, or rather, that feels good.
Yeah, so it's encouraging.
I think at this point, I'm interested to see where you would go. Right. One of my thoughts is, what's his other hand doing? Should his hands be clasped? Should, he be looking at his wrist? What's his other hand doing? Because I think that's part of the storytelling here.
Where I would go, the thing that we've done here is we've gotten a good base down, and now we are iterating on it, right? Like we're asking, what do we want? Where do we want this to go? What are we inspired by? I think the opportunity is with the control is we can really ramp it up when we want to control things, and we can pull it back down or eliminate it completely if we want to really let it go. Now, if we take away the control entirely, I just turned it off, and we kind of like reimagined this part here, my fear is that it's going to kind of like lose the plot a little bit, right? It's going to go like, it's going to go way off script. We'll see what happens just to kind of see like if we're inspired by where it goes.
Yeah.
So now we've got a completely missing arm, but it did bring this in, which is interesting only because it's like, I want both of these in some sense. You know what I mean? Like I like what it did with the hand. Maybe what I'm going to do though, is I'm going to apply that, and then I'm going to turn down the opacity here just so I can like wisely erase it. And then I'm just going to erase what I don't like that it did, which was, you know, take away this arm. Now we've got a little bit of that arm back. You know, we still have the butt of the rifle here. We will kind of like erase some of that up here as well. So now we've got like that hand, or at least the hint of the hand. And we'll probably expand that a little bit as well. So kind of like put the fingers down here and kind of give some shadow to that. So we're still kind of holding on to our original image by erasing some of those layers. But now we've kind of introduced this kind of answer to the question of where's his other hand. It's kind of sitting there on his leg. And then we can kind of come in and ask, you know, maybe this area that's blue for the rifle should actually be like, you know, colored in a little bit. So maybe we'll take some of the colors from up here and bring that down. And we can turn the control back on and also introduce, you know, this hand to the sketch. So I'm going to take away some of these pieces here that would kind of conflict with that and our control image. And then I'm just going to actually draw on this control layer. I'm going to kind of like bring in this sketch of this new finger that it kind of created. So what we probably want to do is add in some regional guidance. And we'll say, you know, this is the butt of a rifle, metal and wood. And I'll even go so far as to say we're going to increase the weight on that. And we'll just kind of tell it what it's seeing here. So I'm guiding it there. And then maybe I'm going to also tell it that, you know, these are hands. We'll do some hands. And so we'll kind of play around and see if we can get it to a little bit more closely iron out this butt of the gun while keeping that hand there. Yeah, there we go. So now we've got the butt of the gun. It understands that the hands are there. There's probably a little bit of like tweaking that we can do because it looks like the hand on top is a little bit kind of like warped, I would say.
But the butt of the gun is much more realized now. I think before it was a little bit abstract.
Yes, exactly. Now we've got this like actual butt of the gun and we're just kind of iterating on the hand. And so I'll bring this up. I think that's probably where my biggest complaint with this piece is right now. And I'll just kind of like, you know, color in that piece. We'll give it some shadow and, you know, we'll let it regenerate that part. I think we'll maybe just regenerate this piece alone because everything else is looking a little bit closer to what we want. And then, you know, we've got an interesting interpretation of our sketch, right?
What I really appreciate is the way that this particular model also brought in the value from the marker. It has some of the rendering from the pencil. Like if you look at his calf there, you can see the vertical lines. That was very much in my sketch, right? And I like it.
We can even see that, right?
Yeah. You know, there's also something to be said for collaboration because as you and I are working on this together, you know, most artists in the video game world tend to work in silos or, you know, in the dark in their own little cube. But doing this together, it sparked all kinds of ideas in my head. Like as we were looking at this and going through the changes, I'm thinking, you know what would be great is if he was more remote. So maybe the background is, you know, snowy mountains and it looks like he's way high in the sky and maybe he's doom scrolling with his other hand. But I think that's the point is this process of working through this and testing out an idea sparked a bunch of new ideas as we're doing it.
There's something about collaboration that is really, I think, a key term in talking about using AI broadly, because I think you've used this before to describe collaboration with the AI model is almost how you should describe it. You're collaborating with this thing that's kind of reflecting how you're describing it, what you're showing it, what you want, and kind of working with you and riffing with you. And I think that is definitely the direction that we hope that all of this is going in, is something that empowers creatives, allows them to get what they have in their heads out, and maybe inspires some new things as you're kind of iterating on it. Well, David, thank you again for the time today. We appreciate it. This has been a really fruitful conversation. And I'll send this to you just in case you want to keep that and kind of cherish what we made together.
Kent, this was awesome. I really appreciate it. These are the conversations I like having about AI. Thanks for exposing, you know, the audience to a lot of these concepts and some of the bigger questions that are out there. I think this is invaluable stuff. I like talking about it. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.